In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a very simple laser cut design file by drawing vectors over a template that's been sketched in advance. The point of sketching this in advance is that you're doing scale in a hands-on way and you're also figuring out pacing. So I took a picture of this and brought it into the computer, and it's not necessarily going to come in at the scale that I drew it in because it's a picture. So if you want that, you can scan it. If you are working with a picture, you have to remember that you're going to have to change the scale of everything to fit into the actual cutting size. So in preparing for this video, I went to the window drop down to find a couple of different palette menus that I'm going to be working with, like stroke and artboard, but I also want to open up the layers. Actually, that's already open over here, but if I wanted to, now you know where I would do that. So I have like the layers menu as well. Um, I definitely feel like the simpler you can approach this, the better. But if you are knowledgeable at Illustrator, you have your own way of doing things. So we have this background layer here that is the image that I brought in. And in order to not move it around, I'm going to lock it by clicking right there and putting on a lock. I'm going to make a new layer that I'm going to draw on. And then if I go over to the toolbar, which I'll move in just so you can see what I'm looking at, there are two color chips at the bottom. It's different than Photoshop where the chips are foreground and background colors, or left and right drawing colors. This is actually a fill chip, and then behind it is a stroke. Stroke is an outline, which you can see over here. I can set the width of that outline if I want to use one. So in drawing this, I'm actually only going to draw with the stroke. So I'm going to change this color by clicking on it to something obvious. And then I'm going to click on the fill color, which is set to white, and click on the none option. So this allows me to draw with a red line with no fill. So if I do a closed shape, it won't fill with anything. And then I can come over here to the stroke menu and say, when I do draw, I want that line weight to be higher or lower. I'm going to use the zoom tool, which is accessible right here, to zoom in on an area that I'm going to work on. I can use the hand tool that's also there to recenter this. And I'm going to point out a couple of other tools that I'm going to use for today's very simple demo. The pen tool, which is to draw my anchor points, and then the anchor point tool, which is to move or adjust the anchor points, as well as work with the handles that create Bezier curves from those anchor points. Additionally, I'm going to be using the selection tools, selection tool and direct selection tool, or the two selection tools up here, and I'll talk you through that as I'm doing it. So first things first, I've got my drawing colors red, no fill. I'm on my pen tool, and I'm going to place an anchor and then place another anchor, and you see it generates a line between the two. In order to stop drawing, I can hit escape on my keyboard. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is draw this point part of the arrow, but the thing about Illustrator is it can be complicated sometimes to not have the line. When I click here and then I click on where I want the point to be, it thinks I'm trying to continue a line. So I'm just going to hit escape on my keyboard to get rid of that and start over. Before I actually draw again, I'm going to select that object and I'm going to lock it. So object, lock, selection. And that way when I use the pen tool, again I'm back at the pen tool, to draw the point, it doesn't see it as a continuation because that's locked. It just sees it as a line that I'm crossing over. So that's my point to my arrow, and hit escape. It's a little bit difficult to see everything because the guide colors and the pen color are the same, so that's my bad. So now I'm going to unlock that line because I don't want to forget that I have a locked line when I'm ready to do a later step, so I'll do it now. Object, unlock all, and then suddenly this is no longer locked. And I'm going to still move on and come back to that whole object. Pen tool, I'm going to place a point, and instead of trying to do a ton of little points to get that curve, I'm just going to do 3. So on the second point, before I release, I'm going to click and drag, and that is pulling out something called a Bezier curve. It's almost like pulling on a piece of wire or something because it curves that way. And then I'm going to go to the last point, and you can see that my curve isn't correct, so I'm going to use the Adjust Curve tool. But before I do that, I'm going to hit Escape, so I've done this segment. Going back to the pen tool and go to the anchor point tool. And this allows me to adjust these handles between points. If you're new at Illustrator, a lot of times you'll click on something and it'll collapse it. It's fine. It's not the end of the world. You can either continue by pulling the handles out of that curve, or what I like to do is do Command Z on my keyboard, and it pops it back into space and gives me the handle. So that's something that is sort of a workaround for that. So I'm going to go here, and I'm actually going to adjust this one as well so that I can really, really follow that curve. Once you get the hang of this, you're really unstoppable. If I want to move this point, instead of just adjusting the curves, I can actually use the Direct Selection tool, which is the first tool. I'm sorry, probably the second tool. Direct Selection is the second tool, and just actually move things that way. It's also another way of moving the handles. So the top selection tool selects the entire object. You can see the bounding box. The Direct Selection tool would let you select just one or the other anchors or handles. Or if I want to move a few things at the same time, I can click and drag and capture a couple of anchors and move them that way. Okay. So now I'm done. It's pretty simple. I've unlocked that first line, so I don't have to worry about it not getting grouped when I try to copy this. I'm going to move these things out of the way a little bit. I'm going to use the either selection tool really, because I'm just capturing both of them, but to be consistent, will use the top one, making that selection. I could group these together and consider them a set of motifs, but that's a little bit advanced and confusing. So all I'm going to do here is copy and paste, and then select again, copy and paste, so that I can build out a pattern. Additionally, it's helpful to have something called the smart guides showing when you're doing this. So show, where are my smart guides? They're there. So that's going to kind of give me this cheat on lining things up, and you'll see more of it in a second. So I'm taking this, I've selected it, I'm going to do edit, copy, edit, paste. And again, there's other ways of doing this that are faster, but this is for very beginner work. And now if I move it into position, you can see that pink line shows me when these are lined up. So I'm going to take this again, edit, copy, edit, paste, and I'm going to move it into position. And don't be afraid to go back and redo things if you feel this is confusing. Like, you can back up the video and try again. I promise you, you're going to get the hang of it, and then this video is going to seem really basic. So once I've done this, I'm actually going to recommend that you make a big field of patterns so that when you do resize it, it fits into the life size that you want, and we're going to get to that next. So I'm going to use my keyboard shortcuts now, Command C to copy, Command V to paste, just to speed this up a bit. And then again, using the smart guides to line things up a little bit. It's pretty good. And then Command copy, Command paste. I'm going to do the next row and use the smart guides to line it up. And I also have my template to see roughly how far apart things should be. The sketching, I think, makes you feel more connected to the actual results. Selecting all, copy and paste, and then you won't be surprised when you go to cut something and it's a different size than you had intended in your mind if you've drawn it by hand. So I have a nice big block of pattern, and again, I'm just going to be rescaling it so it fits into the bed size that I'm going to use. So I can move anything off to the side and it can like live in this gray area. And even at this point, I could theoretically just get rid of this template, but instead I'm going to put another empty layer on, and I'm going to change the drawing color just so that I can see it a little bit better, and use the rectangle tool here, which is under these shape tools. If you hold it down, you can see there are a few shapes. But with the rectangle tool, if I just click once, it'll tell me, it'll give me an input box, and I can say, oh, I want the cutting area to be 15 inches by 15 inches. It's changing to points, but that's fine. I'm going to place it down there, and surprisingly, that's 15 by 15. As I had said, I took a picture, and it came in a different size, so, you know, who's to know what camera and what your distance and all of that does. So all I have to do now is lock that layer, and I can see that's the size that I want. I'm going to bring my chunk of pattern over there, and then in relation to that 15 by 15 inch thing, I can resize it. But I do want to point out that just clicking and dragging means that it's going to resize like irregularly. But if I hold the shift key down, then I can control the proportion of this. And I think this is a pretty good scale relationship compared to the drawing on my notebook. Now, once I have that, I can get rid of the template in the background. So I'm going to get rid of that here by just trashing that layer. But I also now need to set a new artboard. So the artboard that I'm going to use, I can use the existing one. I'm sorry, I did not mean to zoom in quite so much there. I can use the existing one, and I can also draw a new one. So a new artboard here, if I draw it, sorry, I'm getting a little flustered because there's somebody in the hallway. Let me trash this artboard actually. So if I go in here and delete this artboard and delete the other artboard, what an artboard does is it tells me in Illustrator what is the area that I actually want to be using as my art area and what is the surrounding area. So I'm concerned that this isn't working the way I want it to. So I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to go up to File, Document Setup, and I'm going to edit my artboard, which is down here, and just click and drag it so that it's into the area that I want to actually cut with. And then after I've done that, I see that I only have one artboard left, and I can go back to the other tools. All of this stuff in the outside isn't going to cut because that's not going to be read when I import it into the cutting software. The one thing I do want to get rid of here is the layer that had that blue line on it, because I don't actually need that. That was just for me to see where the artboard was going. And of course now looking at this, if I really wanted to, I could change the scale. But do be careful about how big or small the actual cutting is. And if you're not sure, you can activate, we could certainly print this out, but you can also activate the rulers in your Illustrator so that you can see the rulers around the outside. The only confusing thing is right now I'm seeing it in points and not inches. So I would go to the document setup under File and change it from points to inches, and then I can look at the edges of my file and kind of imagine, like, all right, if that's 2 inches, then this is probably about 1/4 of an inch wide, and adjust accordingly. The faster way would be to just scan this or bring it into Photoshop and just rescale it before you bring it into Illustrator. So now you're at the point where you would save it and be able to import it into Illustrator at the laser cutting station, and then adjust your line weight as per their instructions. Okay, sorry about that blip in the middle with my neighbors in the hallway.